And I will introduce our speaker, Abdul Dosunmu. I hope I did that right, since you gave us a lesson. Abdul is a public policy advocate and movement builder with experience in campaigns, government, and community engagement. He leads the Donors of Color Network's Climate Funders Justice Pledge, which is a campaign to shift the center of gravity in climate philanthropy toward racial justice. In addition to his work with the Donors of Color Network, Abdul serves as the founder and chief strategist of the Young Black Lawyers Organizing Coalition, a community-centered movement of young Black lawyers, law students, and community organizers to protect and empower Black voters. Formerly, Abdul was an appointee of President Barack Obama to the U.S. Department of Transportation, where he served as special assistant to U.S. Secretary of Transportation Anthony R. Fox and advisor to the department's chief of staff. Abdul received a BA in 2013 from the University of Chicago and a JD in 2020 from New York University School of Law. He's from Dallas, Texas. Abdul, we're so happy to have you here with us this evening, and we're really looking forward to your presentation and to learn from you what environmental justice is and what are some of the ways that we can move towards it. So without further ado, everyone, let's welcome Abdul.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Mrs. Kelly, for the beautiful introduction. And I must thank you and Mr. Kelly, and of course, my dear, dear friend, Aaron. I think I saw William on the call as well. I just want to thank you all for your tremendous friendship over the years, and really more than friendship, for your familial support and connection over the many years that we've known each other. And I want to thank you for welcoming me to this wonderful space. I have been inspired by what has transpired thus far, and I want to thank all of you, as I've already said this evening, for the beautiful community, the beautiful interfaith space that you all are creating to think about how to do, in my faith tradition, justice and love mercy and walk humbly with God together. So I am deeply honored to be here. As Mrs. Kelly said, I'm here in my capacity as the campaign manager for the Climate Funders Justice Pledge, and I'll get into a little bit more about what that is and what our mission is in just a moment. But before I do that, I want to start us off with just a conversation about environmental justice, because our work is truly anchored in a vision of environmental justice that includes all of us. And so without further ado, I want to play a very quick three-minute video that I think will be particularly helpful to understanding both what environmental justice is and what our mission is as an organization. So I'm going to share my screen very quickly.
4 miles west of glittering Dallas is West Dallas, a bleak, poverty-ridden community that's been one of the early dumping grounds for the city's solid waste. One of the oldest and most controversial industries in the neighborhood has been the 63-acre Murph Metal secondary lead smelter, called RSR. It went into business in 1934 and is located near the Thomas Edison School and a 3,500-unit public housing project. At its prime, RSR pumped more than 269 tons of lead particles into the West Dallas air, what some describe as a toxic stew. The toxicity of lead has been known for some time. It's one of the most widespread environmental hazards in minority communities.
Medical experts will tell you that it decreases the IQ level of children. It does permanent damage to your cognitive abilities. It also tends to settle in the bones, doctors have told me, so that you can have aching arthritis-like pain in the bones. And I interviewed many people in West Dallas who complained of that. They complained of sluggish thinking and sluggish movements and pains in their legs and their arms, particularly people who had worked at the RSR smelter.
In 1984, the state finally ordered that the smelter be shut down and that a cleanup follow in a half-mile radius surrounding the smelter. In 1985, it was declared complete, despite warnings from the Centers for Disease Control that the children living near the plant had lead levels twice as high as was considered safe.
Once West Dallas was pronounced clean in 1985, despite what the CDC had warned, no one wanted to go back in there. No one wanted to look at this community again. It was like, let's shut our eyes, let's move on to bigger and better things.
But West Dallas resident Luis Sepulveda felt the CDC's warnings should not be ignored. His own nephews and neighbors continued to have unexplained health problems, prompting Luis to do an investigation on his own.
The test came back with 7 chemicals: lead, arsenic, chromium, calcium, zinc, mercury. We were very concerned about the lead, and it came back at 2,300 parts per million. And I didn't know what it means. So, when I looked at him, okay, so just, we have lead. But after we found out that standards was 500, we said, wow, what in the world is going on here?
Fighting back, Luis organized the West Dallas Coalition for Environmental Justice. Their goal was to have West Dallas designated a federal Superfund site, a designation that would give access to some $20 billion allocated for the cleanup of toxic waste.
And the fact that we had these test results that we could show the state and EPA themselves brought swift attention from them, because they didn't want to be embarrassed about not finding something that citizens had already found out. And then you have to go out to communicate that information to other people.
That communication included making the lead issue so highly visible that people would be forced to react. Their tactics included issuing warnings to the community of potential hazards, disrupting Dallas City Council meetings, and even picketing the local EPA.
Hooray! 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 We have won the battle, and we're going after the war now.
In May 1993, West Dallas won Superfund status. But the community also recognizes that even when the lead-related problems are cleaned up, there are other industries alive, well, and still polluting.
All right. So I wanted to start there for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that it really speaks to the pervasiveness of environmental injustice in communities of color, in low-income communities of color in particular. And this is an issue that is very close to my heart. This particular story is one that is very close to my heart. My uncle, I am in Dallas physically right now. I grew up in Dallas. That's where Aaron and I met. My uncle pastors a church just down the street from the RSR smelter plant. And my uncle grew up in the West Dallas community. And so I grew up hearing about the lead pollution in this community. And it was in my lifetime that this plant finally started to see some state action to close it and clean it. And so I think what's important about that is just to note that these are not historical issues. These are not issues that predate this moment. These are issues that are very much current and contemporary, and that live in the hearts and souls and bodies and minds and memory of people who are living in those communities to this day. The second piece of this that I wanted to highlight is the community's role in mobilizing the state to respond to this injustice. That the state did not on its own move into West Dallas to rectify the situation, that it took the political mobilization of the community to say, we demand action. And their action is what prompted the action of the state. And I want us to keep those two things in mind as we move through this presentation. So what is environmental justice? Environmental justice is a vision of a world where all people have equal access to healthy and sustainable environments, where we are all able to live in sustainable, livable, healthy, breathable space. The unfortunate reality of the world that we live in is that because of the infection of racism, there are deep, deep chasms in environmental health, both in the United States and around the world. And I'll go through some statistics that are US based in just a moment. But I want us to consider, because I know we have a global audience, I want us to consider that when we think about the communities that are bearing the brunt of ecological damage around the world, they are largely communities in the global South that have been the victims of economic exploitation, racial exploitation over the years. And so this issue is not just a US issue, it is a global issue. Around the world and in the United States, historically marginalized communities of color bear the brunt of climate disaster and environmental degradation. And we'll see that play itself out in a number of key statistics. Whether we're talking about the higher likelihood of being exposed to toxic air, whether we're talking about the fact that Black communities are 54% more exposed to particulate matter pollution than the national population, and Latinx communities are 20% more exposed. Whether we're talking about the ongoing effect of redlining. So for those of you who are not familiar with redlining as a concept, it is the process by which, the practice by which communities of color in the United States were forced into economically disconnected neighborhoods and systematically stripped of the resources to be able to improve their communities. They were denied bank loans. They were denied federal government loans. So there was an entire practice around redlining communities of color into economically disconnected communities. And that was a 20th century phenomenon. But again, as I've already said, what was a 20th century phenomenon can have 21st century effects. And we see that with redlining, because the communities that were hit the hardest by redlining are also the most likely to experience exposure to extreme heat, higher rates of asthma, and proximity to oil drilling. We see the increased risk of cancer for 1 million Black Americans as a result of pollution from natural gas infrastructure. The piece that we looked at talked about the RSR site as a Superfund site. Well, the latest data that we've seen suggests that about 70% of all Superfund sites are located in proximity to public housing projects in the United States, 70%. And so we see elements of race and we see elements of class. So it's pretty well established that communities of color, particularly economically marginalized, historically marginalized communities of color, bear the brunt of environmental injustice, of ecological degradation. And it is in part because those communities bear the brunt of the trauma and the harms that they are actually creating and yielding the most impactful solutions to address the crisis. And so what we have seen over the course of recent years in the climate movement is that the most impactful wins, the greatest successes in battling climate change have actually come up through the work of people of color organizers in the communities that are most impacted. And that's why I wanted us to see the work of Luis Sepulveda in West Dallas, mobilizing his community to fight environmental injustice. So I'm just going to give you just a few examples of what we've seen in recent years around the country of communities of color leading the charge in battling climate change. We saw the Asian Pacific Environmental Network help craft AB 693 in California, which is the largest solar investment in low-income communities of color in history. We saw the Indigenous Environmental Network really take the lead to disrupt the Dakota Keystone XL pipeline and the Atlantic Coast pipelines. We saw the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance mobilize to pass the Climate Mobilization Act, which is the most aggressive energy efficient mandate of any city in the nation. We saw the California Environmental Justice Alliance co-develop the Environmental and Housing Justice Platform to advance a vision of affordable, accessible housing for all Californians. In recent years, we've seen the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy, one of our partners and one of the organizations that helped yield the analysis that I showed in the previous slide. We saw them mobilize to coordinate the Gulf South for a Green New Deal, which is the nation's first regional vision for a just climate transition. So we have seen organizations led by people of color really take the lead in forcing the nation to address the injustice of climate change. And part of the work that we are doing at the Climate Funders Justice Pledge is to address one of the most unfortunate realities of our time, which is that the racism that created the problem is also creeping into the solution. Because right now, the communities that are doing the most to fight the crisis are doing it with the fewest resources because they are woefully and disproportionately underfunded by climate philanthropy. So right now, today, only about 1.3% of climate philanthropic dollars go to people of color-led environmental justice groups that are doing the most to fight climate change. It's about $18 million. And we're talking about billions of dollars spent every year to fight climate change. And so what we are saying as an organization is we're asking the nation's top climate funders to imagine. We're asking them to imagine what would happen if instead of being grossly underfunded, these groups were equitably funded and they were able to take that funding and radically transform this nation's climate conversation. And so our goal as an organization is to shift the center of gravity in climate philanthropy toward racial justice, because we contend that this 1.3% is not simply a moral failing, it's also an ineffective and losing strategy in the long run. So what have we done? We have gone to the nation's top climate funders, the top 40 climate funders, and we've said, we have two asks of you. Many of you have made statements in the wake of the tragic killing of George Floyd around your commitment to racial justice. Well, now we want to see your commitment to racial justice reflected in your priorities, in your budget priorities. And so we've said two things. Number one, we want you to be transparent about where you are currently directing your climate funding dollars. And the idea here is that transparency will yield accountability, that sunlight is the best disinfectant, as the old expression goes. And so we ask the top climate funders to report to us and to report to Candid, which is a major nonprofit reporting system, what share of their climate funding is focused on people of color-led environmental justice organizations. And this gives me a great opportunity to pause here and say how we talk about how we define people of color-led environmental justice organizations. So the first is we ask for a board that is 50% plus people of color. Secondly, we ask for an executive leadership team that is 50% plus people of color. And then finally, we ask for an explicit commitment on the part of the organization, somewhere in their mission statement, somewhere on their website, somewhere in their organizing documents, an explicit commitment to addressing justice in communities of color. And one of the things that I think is unique about our campaign is that what we recognize is that sometimes the environmental movement has thought about these issues in too narrow a way. And so the tendency has been to say that if you are not focused narrowly on clean energy or on specific issues related to what we might think about traditional conversations around environmental and climate justice, that you're somehow not doing the work, when in fact, what we have found is that organizations that are building power within these communities to be able to stand up to industry, to be able to stand up to corporations, to be able to stand up to the state, are critically important to ultimately moving us forward on climate. And so what we say is we want to open up the conversation and not just talk about organizations that are doing work that we might traditionally understand to be environmental work, but organizations that are doing adjacent work, work that engages environmental issues, but also has a broader focus on building power in communities of color. Because ultimately, this is a power dynamic. This is a power game. We are mobilizing communities to fight big business. We are mobilizing communities to stand up to the government in many cases, which has been derelict in its duties to protect communities. And so in order to do that, we have to build power. Building power is part and parcel of addressing the climate crisis. And so what we ask for is, number one, transparency. Let us know where your money's going. We publish that information publicly on our website so that you can go to our website and see where the Kresge Foundation is, how much of the Kresge Foundation's dollars are going to communities of color-led organizations. And by the way, the Kresge Foundation was one of our anchor pledgers. You can see where the MacArthur Foundation is directing its dollars, another one of our pledgers. So you can walk through that data. The second piece of it is we ask those foundations to get to at least 30% of their climate funding going to people of color-led environmental justice organizations. And the 30% number was developed in concert, and I think it's important for us to just amplify this. It was developed in concert with our movement allies. And so we're not just issuing this call of our own prerogative. We are working in collaboration with movement organizations to hold the funding community accountable. So there are two components, transparency and then 30%. So what progress have we made to date? You can see some of the funders, some of the big funders that have come on board, some of the top 40 funders that have come on board. So we have 4 top 40 pledgers who have taken the full pledge. So foundations can take the full pledge. We encourage them to take the full pledge. If they are not quite at the space of being ready to take the full pledge, we encourage them to at least do transparency. So some funders have done the full pledge, some funders have done transparency only, but we believe that transparency only puts those funders on a path to the full pledge and to ultimate accountability. So you can see the funders that have taken the full pledge, names like the Kresge Foundation, Pisces Foundation, Rockefeller Brothers Fund, the Schmidt Family Foundation. These are all top 40 climate funders. You can see next to that, the foundations that have taken the partial pledge that are in the top 40. And some of them are the Hewlett Foundation, MacArthur Foundation, Barr Foundation, JPB Foundation. Again, these are top 40 funders. Additionally, we have a number of funders that are outside the top 40 that have taken the full pledge. And a number of these, if you're in the nonprofit space, a number of these are organizations that you would know, whether it's Open Society Foundation, the David Rockefeller Fund, the Tides Foundation, the Nathan Cummings Foundation. We have really been in some of the new funders, including the Katali Foundation. We've really been intentional about pursuing any and all funders that are moving real dollars into the climate space. So what has it all meant? What has it all meant? Overall, 29 funders have taken the pledge, 11 in the top 40. And these are the funders, by the way, who have committed to at least one portion of the pledge. And in the first year, we have created a new funding baseline for BIPOC-led justice groups of $100 million. And we are very, very proud of that number. But as you might know, there are new funders coming into the space every single day. Seems like every other day, a billionaire announces a new climate initiative. And so we believe that number can go exponentially higher over time as we start to recruit and engage some of those new funders that are coming into the space. A few of the other things that we have done that we think are important to helping to build the overall ecosystem and infrastructure of the climate justice movement. We have enlisted the support of over 70 scholars of color and collaborated with dozens of movement networks. So a couple of things that are important about this. The first is that typically when we have gone in the early days, when we would go to funders and we would say, you got to do more, you've got to do more, you've got to do more, the response we would get is, well, we don't really know who these groups are. We can't find them. We can't identify them. They're not in our normal funding networks. There's a whole range of barriers and, frankly, I would argue excuses that are submitted on the part of these funders. And so what we did in response was we actually worked with our movement allies to amplify the work that they are doing. So you can go to our website right now and you can see profiles of dozens of movement organizations and the wins, the recent wins that they have had, because we want to make this real, not just for funders, but for the communities that we're all serving. That these organizations are doing important work and they're gaining important traction. The second thing that we've done is we have created the first and only compilation of US-based scholars of color who are leading on climate. And so what we're doing is helping to cultivate and grow and amplify the field of research that is happening on the ground in communities right now that is being led by scholars of color. And if you know any sort of the core ideas around diversity, equity, and inclusion, you know that often the scholars that are going to be doing the most intensive, most meaningful work on these issues are the scholars that are coming from these communities. And so we are helping to support the work that they are doing on the ground in their communities. I recently testified, well, now several months ago, testified before the House Natural Resources Committee because congressional Democrats were interested in looking at strategies for promoting justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in climate philanthropy. Now, why are congressional Democrats interested in that subject? President Biden has announced in the very early days of his administration, a program called Justice 40. And it is the idea that 40% of the federal government's resources on energy and the environment are going to be devoted to addressing the exact issues that we've been talking about, environmental injustice in communities of color. Well, what we have found is that you really can't have a successful Justice 40 from a federal policy standpoint if you don't have a meaningful commitment on the private sector side to supporting these organizations, because that support, those grants, the $100 million that we're talking about is what helps them build the kind of capacity that they need to be able to go after federal government dollars. And so in order for Justice 40 to work, our work and the work of so many others has to work alongside it. And so I testified before the House Natural Resources Committee on that very issue. And then, of course, we have been working to amplify the story across the media. And we've been featured in NPR and the AP, the Washington Post, and Politico. So that's really where I want to stop. I have a couple of, I'll open us up, kick us off with some questions, or at least one question. I don't know what we have time for. But what I want to encourage you to do is to go to our website to learn more about our movement. This is a campaign that sounds like it is focused exclusively on big funders. And obviously the pledge is. But what we want to do is make sure that communities know that they are empowered to help us amplify this call to action. And so what we're encouraging people to do is to share the information around our campaign as broadly as they can, as widely as they can, with friends and communities that they're a part of. And we hope that in amplifying the campaign, we can help to build the momentum and increase the drumbeat around this call to action. And then, of course, I always want to put in a word for those of you who are providing support, who are donating, whether you're talking about $1,000 or $10,000 or $100. We want to encourage you to find an organization to support that is led by people of color, that is doing meaningful work in their communities to support. These organizations need our support, and they are often doing the work that changes the world, but with the fewest resources. And so we want to encourage you that if you're looking for organizations to support, look for people of color-led environmental justice organizations. So in closing, we can achieve a world of environmental justice, but in order to do it, we have to address what is not only a moral failing, but is a strategic failing. We have to address the chronic underfunding of people of color-led environmental justice organizations. And I'm proud to be part of the work of doing that. And with that, I will stop share. And what I want to do is just ask for thoughts and reactions that you might have to the presentation, to the video, to this entire conversation around environmental justice. So any initial thoughts that you might have?
Marion, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, first of all, I wish to apologize for coming late. Your very detailed and extremely interesting presentation. I'm sorry I've been caught up in many meetings in the last few weeks. We're involved in projects here. I'm in the Montreal area, involved in projects here in the Montreal area. I myself involved with projects with Indigenous people. Part of my family is Indigenous. And a lot of interesting things going on. And unfortunately, I was too tired to come here at 7:30. I apologize for that. And by the way, I'm a native Texan, even though I've lived most of my life out in the United States. So it's a fantastic thing to see a Texan involved in these things and these activities that you're describing. It makes me understand the complexity of the United States. We tend sometimes outside of the United States, I'm still an American citizen, by the way, a dual citizen, but sometimes we see it as sort of an entity and simplify things, and yet you bring out a lot of the complexity and the importance of hitting at, I wouldn't say grassroots level, but you're hitting at levels of administration that is sort of underneath a little bit other aspects of administration. I'm very, very impressed by that work that you're doing. So I want to congratulate you on this presentation. I'd love to get a copy of it if I could have that, maybe the organizers this group. And I would also like to, I hope that Ottawa people will forgive me. I'd like to invite you to join a similar group in Montreal in the near future. I have to send you information about that later. I'm forming a similar group in the Montreal area. The complexity there would be that it would be bilingual. So we'd have to arrange somehow to have your words translated if you're agreeable to that kind of thing. Well, we have here a number of activities in working with what you in the United States call people of color, and some suburbs of Montreal, they've been working very hard with the police and the local government. The point at a recent meeting I attended a couple weekends ago, the mayor of the city was there to congratulate us on our activities oriented towards bringing more, how should I say, integrating, bringing people more into society. This is very much at a lower level than which you're working. But if you were agreeable, we'd love to have you come, and we'd arrange somehow to translate your words. It'd be bilingual, which we somehow arrange. So I want to congratulate you again on this. And alhamdulillah, we say in Arabic, thanks be God, you're doing fantastic work. The only lacune I would see in what you're doing, and people know, I'm sensitive on this point, that you're talking about a fundamental change in the hearts of men, in the way men perceive things. Men, I mean human beings, because I fear that unless we change people's motivations, unless we hit them at the motivational level where they want to change, where they see the necessity to change, where they see it as a, if you will, almost a spiritual obligation as part of being a human being. I didn't see that aspect. Maybe you discussed it earlier on. I'm not sure. If you did, I apologize. That's the only thing I see. I'm worried that projects, these fantastic projects, will not come to fruition if somehow we don't change the way people think and feel about things. I feel that's a fundamental thing. Anyhow, that's all I don't want. I know other people bursting with questions. And again, I thank you very much. And I do hope to have you here via Zoom, of course, in the Montreal area in the not too distant future. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. Would be honored to share the message as far and as wide as might be helpful. And certainly, what we are trying to do is drive home the point that if we do not collectively address this resource question, we will not collectively be able to solve this crisis.
Yeah, Marion, I'm happy to facilitate connecting you and Abdul. So I'll be in touch.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Aaron, I see you've got your hand up.
Yes, I have a couple questions. First is there a resource or a list? I don't know if it's on the website that you had at the end of your slideshow, of organizations led by people of color that we as individuals might be able to look at and then donate to. And then the second question is, do you think that any act to reduce our contribution to climate change as individuals or as small communities is an act supporting environmental justice because of the disproportionate impact that climate change has on marginalized communities?
Great questions. Thank you, Aaron. The first question to that question, you can go to our website, and we have over a dozen profiles of movement organizations. You can check out a little bit about the work that they are doing. Now, these are not organizations that we would necessarily say that we have any fiduciary understanding of kind of how they navigate or that we're endorsing giving to them, but we certainly would encourage you to consider those organizations or organizations like them And these are groups that I will say we work very, very closely with, that we have seen the impact of their work. We have vetted the impact of their work. And I work with many of them on a day-to-day basis. So I can vouch for the impact of the work that they do. And so, yes, you can go to our website to find that list, and we certainly encourage you to do that. To your second question, what I would say is that I think you're absolutely right, that anything that we individually can do to lessen the environmental degradation and climate degradation that we are all complicit in is meaningful and is impactful. What I would say beyond that, though, is that I think we have to take, in addition to sort of taking general action, I think we also have to take some concerted affirmative action to support the reduction of harms in communities of color. So I think it's both and. I think we must do what we can to limit our contribution and our complicity in this overall crisis from where we are. But I think we have to go beyond that to say, here's what we can do to affirmatively support the people in these communities who are organizing in a meaningful way. And that can be financial support, as you asked about, Aaron, but that can also be joining them, volunteering for them, directing visibility their way for the work that they are doing. One of the things that I hope people walk away with is that there is good work happening. As frustrating as the moment might seem, there are organizations that are doing critically important work on the ground every day. And it helps their work. I think all those movement organizations would say this, it helps their work for all of you to be amplifying it. So I would encourage you to find organizations that you can amplify and share the important work that they're doing. So do what you can where you are, and then take some affirmative action to support other organizations that are doing the work in their communities.
You're muted, Sherry.
Heather, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, I was just thinking about Indigenous people, both in Canada and in the United States, for whom there's often terrible environmental issues. But what happens is that they're hidden in many cases because they're living in the north or on reservations in places that we don't usually see. And it often has to do with water and natural resources. And I was just wondering if you had any comments about that, because hidden inequality, inequality is easier to see, I guess, than others. Like in cities, you might drive through a place like West Texas, but you're unlikely to drive through a reserve in North Dakota. And to bring that to the light, to shine a light on those issues and bring it to this.
Absolutely, and that's one of you're absolutely right that there are hidden issues that we're starting to see and the development of an entire new body of research around a lot of environmental justice issues that typically have not been part of the conversation. Part of that work of uncovering those issues is supporting the researchers that are doing the analysis in their communities and are able to help bring these issues to light. And that's why what we're doing around the BIPOC scholars piece is so important, because what we're trying to do is drive focus, energy, resources to the scholars that are able to unearth those kinds of questions. Because you're right, everything isn't going to be a lead smelter plant. But that does not make it any less environmentally harmful. And the media, as you often know, the media systematically does not cover many communities, whether we're talking about communities of color, whether they're talking about rural communities, low-income communities, that there is a dearth of media coverage often that keeps these issues invisible. And so part of it is supporting the researchers that are doing the analysis. And then part of it is frankly helping to shine a media light on their work. And so we're trying to do all of that through our support of BIPOC scholars communities. But I think you've really hit the nail on the head about what can be challenging about some of this, is that the work is often hidden, in part because the issues are.
Thank you.
Bill,
Very good, Abdul. You always exceed my expectations.
Thank you.
So I'm thinking here, like you're really bringing passion of racism to the passion of environmentalism, and that the passion of environmentalism can be brought to the passion of racism, and where you have two really, I would think discrete, although you're changing my mind somewhat on that, groups of people with two discrete passions battling for progress, for humanity, focused on their specific passion separately. It seems like the message that you're bringing is proposing a marriage between two passions, thereby multiplying the number of people who have the capacity to pursue solutions for both, and engaging them at higher levels of usefulness in society, with their simple passion for humanity and their ability to see that it doesn't have to be broken into these groups of passions where, okay, Black people can go and have their passion about the difficulties of being Black people. Well, I'm going to go have my passion about environmentalism. So I was thinking it'd be nice if we could, what you have is ideas. They're good ideas. They're rooted in the United States, but they're needed universally. And someone was talking about that we need a change of our thinking, of our minds, of our hearts. It just seemed to me like that you have the capacity to bring this line of thinking and its permutations and natural combinations to places like Canada. And I'm not trying to subvert the country. I just got here and they've been very nice to me. But it just seems to me like there's a lot of potential for this kind of thing, to germinate. You got Marion here running off to Montreal, going to convert this to French before you get hung up. So I just want to point out that bigger picture of passions and what people are pursuing with the passion that they have in their good hearts and their good wishes for the well-being of humanity, and starting to multiply those, because they're interrelated by nature. You're capturing very clearly what those interrelationships are and presenting them to people like us who are like, yeah.
Right.
So,
Right. You've hit the nail on the head as usual. That part of there's a lot of what the term that I use for this that I didn't coin, certainly. But the term that I use is intersectionality, and it's understanding the intersection of environmental issues with racial justice issues, with frankly a whole range of other issues, gender justice issues, LGBT justice issues, economic justice issues, that these are all intertwined and interconnected, and too often we have operated in silos to our detriment, because ultimately what we're trying to do is build people power. and change, as someone said earlier, change hearts and minds. And that's going to require a broad coalition of all of us working together. The other intervention, so there are two interventions here, and I know we've got a couple more questions. We've got some questions, hands up. There are two interventions here that I think are important. The first is that we are really breaking down the wall that has historically existed between the environmental movement and the racial justice movement. And the numbers that we saw, that I cited in terms of the funding, I will tell you, the staffing of major environmental organizations, not that much better. And so historically, the broad environmental movement has not been particularly diverse, and there has not been much of a focus on racial justice. And so part of what we're trying to do is break down that wall and merge the two. The second intervention of our effort is that we're talking about people of color led environmental justice movements. And so we're also trying to bring together communities that have historically been disconnected and disenfranchised to work in collaboration and league with one another. And so we're talking about issues as they affect Black folks, but also as they affect Indigenous communities, and as they affect Latinx communities, and as they affect Asian American communities, that we've got to figure out how to come together in collaboration. So there's a lot of intersectionality happening, and the more of it, the better.
Excellent.
Very good. Eva. You want to unmute yourself, Eva?
Sorry. Continuing international dimension, environment is not local, continental, but global issue. So I have a question if there is any collaboration with Africa.
Well, there is not formally, but informally, there is, and a number of the organizations that we're in conversation with operate around the world. What I will tell you is that we have tried to be very focused and disciplined in terms of our call to action to focus on the United States, because there is so much work to do in the United States, as we are seeing every day on the news. We do understand the value and power of global struggle. And as I mentioned in the presentation, we understand that the same divide that exists in the United States exists in terms of the ecological and climate harm that has been inflicted upon the global South around the world. And so it's not a formal part of our program, but I can tell you that we are in informal community and collaboration with a number of organizations that work around the world. We certainly are going to be thinking about ways that we can perhaps export our vision around the world to funders that are doing this work around the world. So we're only, I don't think I mentioned this, we're only about a year old as a campaign. And so we've come a long way in a very short period of time, and we're just getting started.
I think that the work you're doing is remarkable and much needed. And your presentation this evening, I think, has opened our eyes. Maybe we weren't totally unaware, but I think we're definitely more aware now than we were before. I think you have a group of people here who have big hearts and know that our hearts are all connected, and that we're all part of one family, whether it's between the races or between communities in different nations. We recognize that bigger picture that we are all one human family, and also that our livelihood, our well-being relies on us working together and not just looking at our own selfish self-interest, but looking at the well-being and progress of all of humanity. And, you know, I think you've opened our eyes to, you know, to some tools and some organizations that we were not aware of, and of looking at climate issues through a different lens, which is helpful as we look at our own communities wherever we happen to live. So I want to thank you for that, Abdul.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I was honored to be part of the conversation. I look forward to working with many of you, or supporting you from afar in the work that you're doing. And yes, I would encourage you, go to our website if you're interested in supporting this on the US side. Go to our website, see the great work that these organizations are doing. I misspoke earlier. I wanted to just say that we are not formally making a recommendation to give to any particular group, but that we can certainly highly endorse the work and impact that these organizations are having. And we encourage you to take a look at them, but then find organizations in your community, as Mrs. Kelly just said, that are doing the work. I promise you they're there. Find the organizations and volunteer, or give money if you can, or drive the visibility their way. It'll make a difference. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Abdul, we've got your organization in the chat here. So before we leave for the evening, anybody can kind of copy that information down. And I'd like to thank you so much for your presentation and opening our minds and eyes a bit wider tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was great to be in community with all of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And best of luck and success going forward.
Best of luck. May our gracious God bless your activities and support you.
Thank you all.
Yeah, so friends, before we leave for tonight, which is actually a break over the summer, if anyone would like either a copy of the recording or would like to be on the email announcement list for the Environmental Cafe, please put that information in the chat. And I want to thank Bruno, our musician, Abdul, our presenter, Aaron, our technical guy and arranger, and thank all of you for coming and for participating this evening. Take care and have a good summer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you in September,
Thank you
as
very
they
much.
say.
Take care.
Thank you.
All
Thanks,
right.
Abdul.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Right.
Thank you.